right, so that is the sort of stuff we're going to be looking at today. We're going to take a look at different ways of knowing, first off, to differentiate non-scientific approaches from scientific approaches. So we're going to take a look at approaches that are non-scientific, like intuition and authority. And so ways of knowing, we'll start off with the non-scientific approach. This is, when we're talking about the non-scientific approach, they're not invalid ways of getting knowledge. They're not necessarily ways that should be avoided in terms of getting knowledge. Sometimes personal intuition is a great place to start in terms of getting knowledge. The problem is, though, that these are non-scientific approaches. So while they might help you along your journey to get to the truth, you can't take them as the way to get to what's really going on. You might have an intuition and say, oh my gosh, I think we should look at this. I kind of feel like this would be something that should be true, but they're not a scientific way of getting to the truth. They're not a reliable way of getting to the truth. And oftentimes, as we're going to see, they lead you away from the truth. So we'll start off with intuition. And intuition is when you accept unquestioningly, and that's the key to what I was just mentioning, unquestioningly, that's when it gets into a problem, your own personal judgment. So we all have intuitions about things, we all got feelings of things, we all have our opinion, but the problem comes when you accept those unquestioningly, when you decide that, my feeling about this is just the way that it has to be. Why should I question my own inner monologue, my own inner voice? And this intuition has kept people oftentimes from getting to the truth, oftentimes with detrimental effects. So one thing that resisted scientific advance because of intuition is things like the hazards of smoking. So there was a huge push about the hazards of smoking in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and continues on today. But it was very difficult to convince people about the hazards of smoking because of their own personal judgment. So it was very well established that there were risks of smoking. There was increases in lung cancer. There was increases in heart disease. There was a lot of scientific evidence that showed that smoking was very harmful. But a lot of people resisted that scientific evidence because of their own personal judgment. So one of the sources of your own personal judgment that sometimes leads to this belief of things that are untrue are things like anecdotal evidence. And this one is a huge one in our society today. So anecdotal evidence is evidence from a single story. It's evidence from a single instance. And one of the reasons why it was so difficult to convince people about the risks of smoking, about how smoking could shorten your lifespan, about how smoking could cause lung cancer, how smoking could cause heart disease. The reason for this was in just about every single family, they had one person who smoked 15 packs a day since the time that they were 5.5 years old, and they're currently 97, and they're as fit as a horse. There was always that one example that you could turn to, whether it's your grandfather, your grandmother, somebody survived. And that one story kept people from accepting the scientific evidence. It unduly influenced their own personal judgment, and you should never underestimate the effect of a single story. So this is especially important in today's world, where single stories are so incredibly easy to find. So I'll give you an example of another effect of intuition, another effect of this anecdotal evidence that has a lot of impact for our society, and that has to do with the Black Lives Matters movement. So the Black Lives Matters movement was about how black individuals, more specifically black males, were being disproportionately killed by police officers. There was more police brutality, there was more police violence against this one segment of the population. And what continuously appeared on news programs were these single stories. And it almost always seemed to be a white police officer that was unlawfully either unlawfully killing or unlawfully using force against a black individual. So there was a lot of this anecdotal evidence. And because of that, drives and initiatives and programs to fight this phenomenon, to fight this predicament, were focused on individuals. They were focused on sensitivity training. They were focused on racism awareness. They were focused on new strategies for individuals to deal with, minorities. They were focused on the individuals because those were the stories that people were seeing. Those were the anecdotal evidence that was there. So there was a lot of effort put into these programs. As it turns out, there's evidence that that is not the cause of this disproportionate violence against minority suspects. So this was a article that was published quite recently, and what they did was they looked at data for all confirmed use of lethal force by police officers in the United States in 2014 and 2015, and they did find that minority suspects are disproportionately killed by police officers. So there is that predicament, there is that problem. But we as psychologists need to say, how do we fix it? How do we get to the truth of what is causing it? And what they found was, here we go. They go that the vast majority of people killed by police are armed at the times of their fatal encounter, and more than 2/3 possess a gun. So people that are killed by the police, more than 2/3 of them possess a gun. And actually, I believe it was 99% of them are armed in some manner. So either with a knife, with a gun, with some sort of weapon, if they are involved in a police shooting. African Americans are disproportionately killed by police officers nationwide. So there is a problem, right? It's not like they're saying that there's no issue here. There is definitely an issue, but their conclusion was that it's not appeared to be driven by micro-level racism. Rather, it's a combination of macro-level public policies that target minority populations and meso-level policies and practices at police levels. So there's a lot of terms in there, but basically what it is macro level. When you're looking at sociological forces, macro levels are individuals. And what they found was that this was not an issue for individuals. It was not individual racism that was driving this effect. They found no difference in the number of the proportion of minorities that were shot by white officers versus the proportion of minorities that were shot by minority officers. There was no difference there. So all of that sensitivity training aimed at the individual was wasted. It was useless. It did not help this problem. What needs to be done is they need to take a look at the meso level, which is the community or organization policies of police. And they have to look at the macro level, the national society policies that officers have in order to address this issue. So this publication, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't hear about it, is an important way, it's a scientific way of understanding these stories are anecdotal evidence. And the reason that they're so powerful is because our minds are geared, they're made, they're programmed to understand stories. They're programmed to understand in single instances. They're programmed from years of evolution that if you walk into a forest and you see one wolf, there's probably other wolves around. So a single story has a lot of power, but we have to remember that that's intuition. That's just that one single story, and that's a non-scientific approach, and we can't let it drive our pursuit of the truth. We have to use scientific means, and in this case, they looked at aggregate data to get to a more truthful picture. All right, so any questions on anecdotal evidence and intuition? Mm-hmm.
What were the terminologies? Micro?
Oh, so it was micro level is the individual. Meso level would be the community or the organization. So that would be like the precinct or the police department. Macro level is national or society. So that would be the United States' approach to law enforcement in general. And what they found was that it wasn't this individual. It wasn't the attitudes of the individual, the racism of the individual towards minorities. That wasn't what was driving the disproportionate killing of minorities. It was these policies here and these policies here that were the contributing factors. All right, so that's intuition. Another way of non-scientific way of knowing is to rely on authority. And authority is, again, a fine place to start, but you can't rely on it. You can't accept it unquestioningly. And there's two reasons for that. Sometimes people that get in authority don't necessarily know or are experts in what they're talking about. So some sources of authority should not be trusted for things like climate change, right? They're not knowledgeable on those particular subjects. Another reason that authority is really kind of taken a nosedive in recent years is because people that are accepted as authorities has changed over the years. So if you go back a couple of decades and you watch news interviews, right, on TV, and they have something like, we're talking about the latest advances in treating. Let's go with autism. We'll go with the hot button issue. We're talking about the latest advances in treating autism, and we have, with us today on the panel, Dr. Smith, who received a PhD in child development from Stanford University, and she has 20 years of experience working in an autism center. She's joining us today for our discussion on autism. Welcome. That was a couple of decades ago. Today, same program. We're talking about treatments in autism. Today we have online blogger Joan with us. She has 100,000 subscribers to her blog, Mommy and Me, Autism, and let's see what she has to say. Authority has kind of taken a downturn, so it's really iffy to rely on authority. Again, it's a non-scientific approach to knowledge. All right, so those are the non-scientific ways. Fine to use them, don't use them unquestioningly. Fine to kind of start with those, but don't use them as the sort of end game towards getting towards the truth. You want to get towards the truth, you need to use scientific approaches.